Financial Argument. Follow us on YouTube.
Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, it looks like the IMF is getting a little worried about Greece because, as we know, their debt cannot be sustained. They've already written a report saying that it cannot be sustained whatsoever. And the executive board of the International Monetary Fund, well, they reached an agreement on the provision of a 1.6 billion euro, which is a $1.8 billion conditional loan to Greece. Now, the arrangement, which supports the authorities' economic adjustment programs, has been approved in principle, which means it will become effective only after the funds received. And, of course, Greece has to meet specific and credible assurances that they're going to reduce their debt, make it sustainable, and they're going to have to work through some of the economic programs, which means more austerity, selling off more of their assets, and basically doing whatever the bankers want. Now, it looks like they're saying, here's some funds because we're very worried that if we don't give you more debt, you will collapse. And if you collapse under our watch, everyone's going to point to us saying, wait a minute, you told us everything was fine. You told us by giving them more and more debt, their economy is going to improve. And if you notice, the central bankers, they will always give you more debt because if they don't, well, the whole thing just implodes. They need to keep this going, and they need to rob the country of all its real physical assets. And this is what we are seeing. This is what's in store for every single country who has a private Western central bank which loans money with interest attached, which does not care about the economic condition of the country. All they care about is receiving profit from their debt. Now, here in the United States, we see that things, well, they are not improving whatsoever, and especially for GM. They have been whacked really hard. Now, remember, all throughout this last, 8 years or so, they've been telling us how great car sales are. It's incredible. Everything's fantastic. Sales are going through the roof. And again, we broke it down. They channel stuff the dealership lots. Those counted as sales. And we knew that this was completely fake, phony, and false. Now, what has happened here is that U.S. car sales, they plunged by 19%. And in June, 38%. Now, the rest of the industry is down around 10% or so. Now, GM is losing ground in the entire industry-wide car sales arena. And what we're seeing right now is that the cars are stuffed into the lot. The lots have about 180 days worth of supplies. So GM is cutting production, they're laying off, they're closing plants, and they're looking to discontinue certain vehicles. The Chevy Volt, the Buick LaCrosse, the Cadillac CTS, the Cadillac XTS, the Chevrolet Impala, the Chevrolet Sonic. They're looking to basically get rid of these automobiles because it is just not worth it right now. And we see they're in a big amount of trouble, and it's not going to end well for any of these corporations. And we need to remember that these corporations, well, their pension plans, they are very underfunded. And we have a list here of the most underfunded corporate pensions. Now, when we look at this, we have to remember that these pension plans, as of the end of 2016, 90% of the top 200 corporate pensions in the S&P were underfunded to the tune of about $382 billion. Delta Airlines, 49.4%. American Airlines, 58%. Procter & Gamble, 59%. Parker Hannifin, 62%. First Energy, 65%. DuPont, 67%. General Electric, 67%. And when you look at this, you can see a lot of these corporations, their pension plans are underfunded, and they're going to be in a lot of trouble as we move forward. This individual, Larry Burrell, who is retired and worked for the Ohio Iron Workers, well, his monthly take-home pension was cut by more than a half, from $3,700 to $1,600. Can you imagine the country where everyone's receiving a pension of $3,700, $5,400, $2,300, or whatever the amount is, and it is cut in half? What do you do to survive? Or maybe the corporation goes under and there's absolutely nothing for you. Well, this is what's being played out right now. And if we think about it, if we go back to 2007, going into 2008, 2009, where a lot of individuals, where they thought they had these pensions, who work for like GM and many other areas, all of a sudden their pension plans, dropped dramatically, and many people were very worried. Many people lost a lot of their money, especially, when they lost their jobs. They also lost their investments, their homes. This time around, as we can see, since this economy has been built on one gigantic illusion, it's not going to be any better. It's going to be that much worse. And we can see the central banks, what have they been doing? They've been propping up the stock market, making everyone think that the economy is doing well, thinking that all these corporations are doing very well. But most of these corporations, they don't have the sales. They're doing these tricky accounting methods to make everyone think that everything is fine. They're buying back their stocks. And when all is said and done, we're going to come to find out that most of this has been a lie. Now, they keep talking that, there's a lot of cash on the sidelines. We're just waiting for all this cash on the sidelines to be invested in the market, and everything is going to be fine. Well, there is no cash on the sidelines. There is nothing out there. What we're seeing right now is that private client cash, high net worth individuals, or those who still allocate capital to single stocks and ETFs on a discretionary basis, well, guess what? It is at a record low. It's around 10.4%. And if we go back to 2011, back then it was at 12%. Right before the crash, back in 2007, it was at 11%. It peaked in 2009 at 21% and dropped all the way down to 12% in 2011. Here we are in 2017. It's at 10.4%. Who's propping up the market? We know who it is. It's countries and central banks who are purchasing stocks. They have their own trading desks. We know that this is completely fake, phony, and false. Now, we're getting another indicator that we are entering this recession period. Now, I believe we've been in recession since 2016, the mid-2016 part of the year. And again, governments, the Fed, they don't admit to a recession. They will go back in time once the recession hits, once we're in the recession, in the collapse. They'll go back in time and say, oh, yeah, by the way, it started in mid-2016. But what we're seeing right now is that the growth in the supply of U.S. dollars fell again in May, this time to a 105-month low of 5.4%. The last time the money supply grew at a smaller rate was during September 2008 at a rate of 5.2%. The money supply metric used is an Austrian money supply measure. It's a metric developed by Murray Rothbard and Joseph Salerno, and is designed to provide a better measure than the M2. The Austrian measure of the money supply differs from the M2 in that it includes treasury deposits at the Fed and excludes short-time deposits, travelers' checks, and retail money funds. M2 growth also slowed in May, falling to 5.6%, which is a 20-month low. Now, money supply growth is a helpful measure of economic activity. Now, during periods of an economic boom, money supply tends to grow very quickly as banks make more loans. Now, during recessions or when the economy turns downward, guess what happens? Well, we see a falling money supply. And this is what we are seeing right now. And of course, thanks to central banks, money supply growth in recent decades has never gone into negative territory because they're able to keep it where it is. But it still shows us, as it continually drops and falls, that we are entering a recession. Now, loan growth also has not been this weak since April of 2011. Now, we're finding these similar trends in real estate loans and in consumer loans. So when you put all this together, this indicator is letting us know that we're already in a recession or we're entering a recession, because we've seen this before. And I'm going to say, since we've seen the money supply drop like it has, which is the equivalent back to 2011, prior to 2011, 2009, 2010, this is showing us that we are already in a recession. And we are headed to this major collapse. So when we start looking at all these economic indicators and we're starting putting all of them together, we're starting to see a very clear picture that we're already in the middle of this recession, just that nobody wants to admit it. But this is where we are right now. Now, the central banks know this already, and they're very terrified that their one indicator that is tricking everyone is going to basically show everyone what's really going on. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the stock market, the S&P 500, and all the other manipulated economic statistics that the government and the Fed uses where they can completely control it. Now, remember, last month, both Fed President Janet Yellen and ECB President Mario Draghi, they've issued somewhat of a hawkish statement only to turn around within, 48 hours, where they walked back their comments and they said, oh, no, we didn't mean that. First, it was the ECB President Mario Draghi, which claims that the ECB was considering gradually removing its stimulus programs. All of a sudden, European markets dived in response to this. So Draghi sent out his number 2 guy on a PR campaign and said this was not really what he meant. It was misrepresentative, and basically the markets went back up. Then came Janet Yellen, suggesting that the Fed will be engaging in multiple more rate hikes and shrinking its balance sheet, only to turn around a few days later to deliver some of the most dovish testimony to Congress in Fed chair history. Yellen completely contradicted all of her early statements, claiming that the Fed was just about done with its rate hikes and that it would not use its balance sheet reduction to drain liquidity from the system. Well, guess what happened? She went back on everything that she said because she saw what happened in the market. And this is what is happening here. They're testing the grounds to see how everything is going to respond. And if these manipulated economic indicators that they use drop, well, guess what? They step back from it because they understand if these go down, everyone's going to be looking, going, what just happened to the economy? Because remember, the majority of the people look at the stock market. They look at the S&P 500. They believe what the corporate media is saying. They believe what the Fed is saying. And they don't look at the real economic information. Go back to 2008. The economy was completely falling apart right before the market came down in October, then again in 2009. I mean, you saw companies going under, they're being bailed out, people were just walking away from their homes, corporations were laying off like crazy, and this was all happening while they were telling us the economy was great, it was sustained, they're not forecasting a recession. The same thing is happening once again, but they figured out how to control it a little bit better. But again, reality is going to set in, and once reality sets in, the whole thing is just going to come down. And we're seeing all these economic indicators. And we know how it ends. We know how all of this ends. It ends in a disaster. This is why you need to be ready